And astonishingly, 5 years later, we have in 2015 IP Man 3, which is a very different type of sequel and a follow-up to the first two movies than expected. The first two movies, I think, are very quite close together. They're quite tightly knitted films, almost kind of 5-star masterpiece level kind of movies, fantastic cinema experiences, where 3 and 4 I think are slightly weaker. I think they're just a product of kind of the modern kind of age of Hong Kong movies, kind of martial arts kind of films, and they're quite different compared to the first two in terms of they're not as violent, they're a bit more tame films, a bit more kind of easily commercial movies. And the fact this time around you don't have Sammo Hung directing the action, you can definitely tell that, because the action in the film is not as strong as it once could be, and the fact you don't have that kind of edge that you once did before compared to the first two movies, being the fact they're kind of sacrificing that for more of a commercial, more mainstream kind of approach to these kind of IP Man movies, I think is really telling. Very decline weakness between 3 and 4, between the first two movies. Not to say I don't like them, I do enjoy 3 and 4, but surprisingly, when you're telling me that the third movie 5 years later, back in 2015, had Mike Tyson, the boxer, in it, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but the film actually was pretty goddamn good. I actually really enjoyed it. 3 is nowhere near the level of the first two, but I actually do really enjoy this. I think it's a pretty solid, pretty good conclusion to the trilogy. Obviously got the fourth movie later on, but if this was the last one in terms of wrapping up the series, I think this would have been a perfect conclusion. And what the film gets right, and what the film does so well, it focuses on the right areas, you know, despite its weaknesses in terms of the fighting a little bit, in terms of kind of the losing the edge, it focuses on the right aspects of what I like about the series, about the characters, about the relationships, in terms of the good value nature of the kind of the grandmaster, the IP Man. And the film follows the character, I think, a couple of years down the line. I think his son's grown up a little bit more now. I think he's going to be killed in the way. And basically Mike Tyson and this kind of other kind of gangster kind of group is terrorizing the village, of course. They're kind of they want to take over kind of properties, and they kind of want to seize assets and kind of causing trouble, you know, kind of bullying people, getting blackmail from kind of other kind of, you know, various kind of parties in the sense. And of course the IP Man's character is taking his son to school. The school itself is trying to be robbed and kind of boarded up and being terrorized and almost being burnt in a sense by a bunch of kind of gangsters. And obviously him being a good-natured kind of community person and his kind of skill sets within Wing Chun is a good kind of defense against kind of these gangsters, and he kind of takes upon that challenge and explores kind of characters that are kind of desperate and kind of feel kind of belittled by kind of the community in terms of the kind of the pressure of martial arts. It was taught by a kung fu master who dropped out, who used those skill sets to kind of take on and belittle and bully people, but wasn't very good himself. Obviously he can't take on things in a fair way, so has to use intimidation, blackmail and violence to kind of achieve his goals. And obviously he's working for Mike Tyson's character, which is an American kind of gangster character, a typhoon who really wants all these properties, who wants to get things done. And he comes into town and basically says, you know, you're failing me, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. If you don't deal with it, I'll deal with it. And it's quite an interesting aspect. I think there's a picture there. There with the characters there, yeah, of course. And I actually thought, how silly, how over the top are they going to make this? Because when you see you got Mike Tyson in the film, he can't act. There's a fantastic fight scene that goes on later on towards the kind of second act of the film, where they kind of basically have to like have a toe-to-toe, you and me take on each other, my boxing skills versus your kind of Wing Chun, and whoever drops first wins, and whoever kind of, you know, if you can survive me, you know, I'll let you keep your property, I'll let you keep your school. It's a fantastic fight. It's a really, really good fight. It's a really well done, really balanced fight, and they kind of complement both Donnie Yen and Mike Tyson's abilities very well in terms of their strength, in terms of their abilities, in terms of their kind of craft, and it's really well handled. It's probably one of the best fight scenes in the entire film. Our kind of secondary character in the film is a very young kind of, you know, father character who has a son who is kind of doing these kind of boxing challenges, who is doing kind of mini thug kind of intimidation, kind of, you know, robberies in a sense to kind of make ends meet. He's someone who's also a master in Wing Chun, who wants to be number one, who wants to be known and earn the money and earn respect to this community. But obviously Donnie Yen, the grandmaster, is the top dog. He is the grandmaster of that kind of field. You know, I can't be number one until I take on him, you know, and that's the thing. That's what makes it an interesting kind of journey for the character. As I mentioned, I think the fighting in this film is a little lacking compared to the first two. I think it's a bit more tame, but it's still pretty good. I mean, when he gets to kind of the big sequences, the kind of the big crowds, him versus 10 people and the one-on-one, the fighting in the film is actually a lot more tied into the kind of the emotional ties to what's going on in the film in terms of, you know, defending the school. You know, there's a fantastic sequence within an elevator where Donnie Yen has to kind of defend, you know, an attacker that's going after him and his wife, which I think is brilliant. It's one of the best sequences of the entire film. And with all this going on, with a crazy over-top, you know, Mike Tyson, you've got gangsters, you know, big epic fight scenes, you've got a kind of secondary challenger, kind of Wing Chun villain character that wants to do the right thing. You've got other secondary villains like taking on Donnie Yen left, right and centre. One of the best aspects about this entire film, and one of the things that made the film so work for me and actually sold the film completely, was the story between him and his wife. Fantastic, so heartwarming, so well done, well crafted. You know, the character in the film, the wife, has been through so much throughout the first two movies, and you know, I've talked about this a little bit, how they've explored her character in terms of the son as well. In the film, in real life as well, she did have cancer, she was dying, and you know, she, you know, kind of kept that secret for a little bit because she knew how much, you know, the grandmaster's character loves his kind of craft. But there is a little bit of like distance between them two, and that's explored between the first two and this one especially, where she wants to go dancing. Obviously he's not there because he's defending, you know, his honor or something, or defending someone else's honor, and it's kind of about a little bit of loneliness. She tells him she has cancer. It's handled so well and so maturely and so respectfully. Well, I think it was fantastic and really emotional, and I think having the idea that him kind of quitting, you know, the challenge from the kind of our secondary villain character, this kind of other Wing Chun character that wants to challenge the IP man for the honor title of being the grandmaster. In a sense, he doesn't turn for the fight, he's done, he quits it all to spend every last second he can with his wife, and he goes dancing, he spends days with her and his son, and it's some of the best sequences in the entire series, and I think it's really heartwarming, it's really well handled, it's emotional with the scenes play out, the music, and I think it's a good honor, a good end to the character, and you know, the struggle between, you know, being that kind of highly respected kind of character and sharing him with the community in a sense, and I think they do a really good job of kind of concluding that kind of arc. And I think it's really well done, really touching, really brilliant. And this all leads up to a brilliant finale where basically she allows him, she understands, you know, this is important to him. And so she knows, like, basically he was called out and he failed to turn up. And, you know, the other character has got all the glory, he's got the kind of, he's being named number one within Wing Chun, kind of the, you know, the martial arts community. He's never number one until he takes him on one-to-one and defeats them. Really kick-ass fighting at the end, really well done. Two masters in the same kind of craft, and they really showcase what they can do, and it's brilliant. It's a slightly lacking sequel, but a really well done modern Hong Kong movie that really delivers on what it's trying to do, what it's trying to say. If IP Man 1 is the kind of the brutal nature, the kind of the stand-up courage of kind of going against the kind of, you know, Japanese, number 2 is kind of standing against corruption between British people in terms of honouring kind of Hong Kong. Number 3 is the heart and soul and the conclusion of his kind of journey with his wife, and his kind of coming to peace with his kind of end, almost to the end of his kind of career as a kind of trainer, as a kind of Wing Chun kind of master. And I think it's a very satisfying conclusion, if anything, to a trilogy.